Hi, Dr. Warren. I hope you're doing well. Let me share my screen here from beginning. Okay, so the title of my presentation is Disparities in Infant Mortality Due to Racial Discrimination. And so for my abstract, there exists a very large disparity in infant mortality rates between white women and African American women in America. And many research efforts have already been conducted in order to pinpoint the exact contributor to this, but those efforts have only gone to show that there are many factors that contribute to this disparity. And so this study focuses on furthering the research determining if exposure to racial discrimination has a relationship with low birth weight in infants of women of color, which is a leading cause of infant mortality, low birth weight is. And in 2007, the infant mortality rate for women of color was over 2 times the rate for white women in America. And that was in 2007, but in 2017, as you can see from my graphic, the infant mortality rate for women of color was still over 2 times that of white women in America and per 1,000 live births. And so even 10 years later, this still proves to be an ongoing issue. And like I said before, a large contributor to this statistic is the disparity in low birth weights between white infants and African American infants. And an infant is considered to be low birth weight if it is below 5 pounds, 8 ounces. And like I said before, many factors contribute to this difference. And this study focuses on the relationship between racial discrimination and low birth weight rates. And for my literature review, I reviewed many studies, and the first one is that in 1997, Collins and David set out to disprove the theory that biology is a contributor to this, that the issue is nothing more than just innate biological differences between white women and women of color. And so in order to do this, they compared the frequency of low birth rates in 3 categories: in US-born women of color, in US-born white women, and African-born white women of color. And so the results of this study showed that the low birth weight rates in US-born women of color was still higher than both US-born white women and African-born women of color. And so this proves that biology is not a contributor and that the problem lies in something deeper. And so furthermore, in 1993, Schoendorf, Hoag, Kleinman, and Rowley determined that infants born to college-graduated African Americans had a higher low birth weight rate than similar infants born to college-graduated white families. And a lot of people theorize that the issue behind this disparity is determinants such as education level, but this study went to prove that the issue again is bigger than just one's education level, because the infants born to similar families, the infants born to women of color still had a higher rate of low birth weight rate. And so a study conducted in 2009 by Collins, David Rankin, and Desiridi went to see if poverty indeed it has effect on low birth weight rates, and they found that they found that rates of low birth weight increased even as the maternal grandmother's residential environment declined, and this was regardless of the residential status of the mother. So they found that poverty influences low birth weight rates even across generations. And so that was one factor that contributes to it. Furthermore, a study conducted in 2002 researched the effects of chronic stress due to racial factors on levels of bacterial vaginosis in pregnant women. And bacterial vaginosis is a contributor to infant mortality. And so the results of this study, done by a lot of people, showed that women of color experienced higher levels of stress, and therefore they had significantly higher levels of bacterial vaginosis. And lastly, a study conducted in 2004 by Collins, David Wall, and Andes showed that women of color who worked outside the home, those who gave birth to low birth weight infants were more likely to report racial discrimination in their workplace than mothers of non-low birth weight infants. And so this laid the foundation for my study. And my hypothesis is that there will be a direct correlation between the level of discrimination in a woman's everyday life and the rate of low birth weight infants. And so for my methods, I would choose 50 pregnant African American women, and they would be asked to complete a survey using the Everyday Discrimination Scale, or the EDS. And this scale measures routine discrimination in day-to-day life using a 5-point scale. And so the participants would be asked to complete this survey during an antenatal checkup, and it will also be determined if their baby is of a low birth weight or not. And so there are 2 variables measured. The first one is the level of everyday discrimination, and the second is whether or not the baby is born at a low birth weight. And so the responses to each question for each participant will be tallied into a total number, and the weight of each participant's infant will also be recorded. And so the result of this survey will be applied to the frequency of low birth weight infants to determine if there is a relationship between low birth weight and a higher number from the survey, and a higher number would suggest more racial discrimination in the women's every day-to-day life. And so in conclusion, the purpose of this study was to determine if there is a direct relationship between everyday racial discrimination and low birth weight rates in women in America. And if the results of this study prove to be significant, further evidence would be established showing that low birth weight and ultimately infant mortality results from racial discrimination. And evidently, the solution to eliminating this disparity lies in a continued search for the many factors that contribute to it, not just a few, but all of them. And future research should focus on a lifelong approach, because limitations of the study include a lack of personalization in the survey. And so future researchers should focus on a lifelong approach. They should conduct in-depth interviews about the participants' lifelong history with discrimination. And determinants such as poverty, high crime communities, segregation, and racial discrimination should also be considered. And once we can pinpoint all of these factors that contribute to this disparity, then we can begin eradicating it, and efforts can be made to lower the gap or decrease the gap between this disparity. And so, yeah, thank you.